No, I'm trying to get there. I've got like a minute, maybe two. Yeah.
When did the power kick back on?
I don't know. I wasn't here.
Oh.
Yeah, I got a class, honey. Two seconds, theoretically. Okay. No more noise, please. Hello, folks. Not sure if you can hear me or not, but the class is going to start shortly, and glad you're here. Hopefully the sound is just fine. And we'll give people a couple minutes to just pop in, and then I'll begin. Okay. So, hello and welcome to this class about amnesia. My name is Lee, or LeeAllure, but I'm not really that formal. So, if you are interested in hypnotic amnesia, there are all sorts of different ways that a person or persons can achieve it. And we're going to talk about several of those ways today, in addition to why you might want to do it, why you might not want to do it, and ways in which you might have really great success with amnesia. So I like amnesia as a hypnosis top because it lets me know when somebody is a really good subject. And initially, when I started doing hypnosis, it let me know when somebody had actually been hypnotized versus playing along. I'm not really big on role play, so whenever I got to work with somebody who was actually hypnotized, that made everything a little bit better for me. It's also a lot of fun to be able to surprise a subject later with doing something and then letting them know that they had actually forgotten it and that they just responded automatically. And if you are a hypnotist and you're doing things with a subject and you would like to be able to surprise them, you would like to be able to show them how amazingly good they are, inducing amnesia is one of the best ways to do it. Now, one of the most common tropes about hypnosis is the phrase remember to forget and forget to remember. So it's a double bind, right? You're either remembering to forget everything you've been told in a certain period of time, of course, not forever, or forgetting to remember what you've been told. And however you find yourself doing it, no matter which one you pick, the end result is the same thing. The end result is amnesia, which is fabulous. So, when you think about the ways in which people can find themselves doing those things, there are a lot of different ways. And a lot of different people have different aspects of themselves that already forget things in new and interesting ways. And most humans forget things effortlessly. We have to forget things all the time because our conscious selves really can't handle a lot of information, even though our unconscious mind takes in so much data. So any of our senses take in so much data all the time, but our conscious self can only handle a slice of that, a very tiny and narrow slice of that. So we're always forgetting stuff. And if our unconscious mind doesn't think that something is really important, then it's going to forget it. So how can you make something be not important? Sometimes if a hypnotist is trying to get a subject to forget something, the hypnotist goes, "Oh, you're going to forget this thing." And the subject gets all excited and goes, "Okay, I'm going to forget this thing," except they can't forget to let it go. So we need to find different techniques that work that allow somebody to not be that excited about a thing, to just think of it casually and non emotionally, and to allow themselves to just let that slide right off into their past, into a dark, dusty corner, a place they never look, a place they never think about, but a place that's known to you, a place that's known to their unconscious, a place where things are accessible, so that when you'd like to have them recall it, you can. Now, the safety aspects about amnesia involve people not forgetting stuff that's important to them. Because when people forget stuff that's important to them, it can cause all sorts of issues. And the issues might involve them still responding in a certain way to a thing. Instead of being able to let it go, they can't really let it go because even though it seems like they've forgotten it, they've just repressed it. And sometimes it means that the thing will come roaring back into their memory, causing them some kind of trauma, additional trauma. So, in that instance, if somebody wants to forget something that was terribly traumatizing, terribly painful, you remove the memory of the emotion from it. You remove the emotion from the experience. And when you do that, people forget about things. I mean, there are probably, for example, presents that you've received over your lifetime, and some of them have been amazing, and some of them have been terrible, and some of them have been somewhere in the middle, and you just kind of forgot. And maybe that involves like underwear or socks or a t shirt for Christmas or your birthday or something like that. It doesn't really matter how you make them forget that, but we'll talk about a whole bunch of ways in which you can get somebody to forget things. It matters that they didn't really care about it. It was a thoughtful thing. It was nice. Maybe they sent a thank you card. Who knows? But otherwise, completely unemotional, not excited, not terrible, just meh. And it slides right out of the brain. So you can remove people's emotional attachments to a person, an object, a thing, an action, and they'll let it go. They'll forget all about it. I like to have people forget things if I want to bring it up later at some point in time. So I was just talking about Christmas presents. I happen to enjoy when I'm shopping with somebody if they say something along the lines of, um, "Oh, I really like this thing." I like having them forget that they've said that they liked it or that they wanted it. I like having them forget that they had indicated anything about it, forget that they've seen it, forget that they know about it, buy it, and then give it to them later because it's helpful. I'm really bad at giving presents. It's just me. So I really like when I know I'm getting somebody something that works really well that otherwise they might have bought for themselves. And this way they can just wait and I'll give it to them and I know that it's something that they had longed for. So I like using amnesia for that. Sometimes I like using amnesia for other things like playing around with my partner and sometimes I forget that I have them forget that they know who I am. It's very fun and entertaining for us. You can find ways in which that works for you as well. So, some people are just so incredibly good at forgetting all sorts of things, their keys, where they left that piece of paper, why they came into this room. You probably know people like that if you aren't already one of those people like that yourself. So, your brain can, in addition to examining how somebody might naturally forget a thing or how they might naturally remember a thing, you can always use different types of techniques to get somebody to hold on to a certain memory and make it really strong and really powerful while you're also talking about other things. And if you find yourself talking about other things really excitedly, really powerfully, and just slide some other stuff in there, for some people, that particular way, that particular technique works really, really well because then they hold on to the stuff that was exciting and they let go of all the other stuff. And their brain just naturally remembers the exciting stuff and lets go of the other stuff. Now, you may also have heard of other types of techniques like, um, let's see, confusion overload, right? You may have heard about a confusion overload technique. So let's talk about that one for a second. So, when people take in too much information at a time, their brain can only process so much. Their conscious self can only process so much. And for most people, that is 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information, which is one reason why phone numbers are a certain size in a certain way, which is why a social security number is that way, which is why we break things down into chunks. The chunk can become 1 unit. We can remember 1 unit, 2, 3. So keep that in mind when you're trying to give people a lot of information. Now, there are confusion overload techniques that have you engage all of your senses. So they might have you pay attention to the sound of my voice, pay attention to the pocket watch that I'm holding up in front of you. I probably have one I could show you. Pay attention to the pocket watch I'm holding up in front of you. Pay attention to the sound of my voice. Pay attention to the temperature in the room. Pay attention to any other sounds you hear in addition to the sound of my voice. Pay attention to the way that your body feels while you find yourself sitting on that chair or in bed. Notice how it feels when your feet are flat on the floor, or in my case, on the rails of my chair wheels. Pay attention. You get the picture, right? You just go on and on and on, listing all these things that a person can pay attention to. And when you find yourself talking about all those things that a person may pay attention to, at some point in time, it's going to be easier for them to just focus on one thing, whether that's the sound of your voice, whether that's the pocket watch. It doesn't really matter. The way that your unconscious mind processes information is that for most people, every single thing that you can find yourself tossing into that image, into that idea, into that pay attention to pot is going to be yet another thing that if they try to pay attention to all of them, their brain just is simply going to let a couple go. Now, yes, you can train yourself to remember more pieces of information But we're not talking about that here. So if you're working with somebody who has trained themselves to remember more and more pieces of information, then you might need to find a different technique. And that's a thing that is really important. So if you wanted to find yourself paying attention to all the techniques out there, there's a lot. I haven't listed them all because every single person is different. But there's so many different techniques out there that one of these techniques that I've mentioned today is likely to work with a person, or you could ask a person how they managed to remember or how they've discovered they've forgotten something. Because sometimes the mechanics within a person help them to do things better or worse. And you can find yourself adjusting what you do versus what they normally do, and you can adjust what they do so that then they can't remember a thing that you'd like them to remember. And let me just clarify that with an example. So a friend of mine was playing with another friend, and um, they said that they normally remembered things after the fact because um, they remember things after the fact because their brain um, was putting things in boxes or putting things like on a movie screen. And they could go and replay the movie and they could go look in the box and find the movie. So, what if you like turn the movie projector off? What if you got rid of every single box and things just like got tossed in a river nearby or a little lava pit or something and they just simply got destroyed? You can always find a way to take what somebody's actually doing and make a change to it so that it becomes impossible for them to actually hold on to the memories that they think in the past they might have been able to hold on to and now they just can't. So let's talk about send it away. Some people are very, very good at all of these. Some people are very, very good at a select few. And this is why we're going to be going over about 10 or 12 so far. So, um, for some people, it can be as easy as saying forget to remember and forget and remember to forget. For some people, you can just give them a lot of information and have them expect to forget some of it. For some people, you can find what it is that's their key to remembering a thing and change it so that they can't remember it in the same way. So send it away is one of the things that their unconscious mind can do is to take all that information out of their head. So you can ask somebody's unconscious self to just say, hey, that thing that I just told you that you know you're going to act upon later, I just like you to take any reference to that, anything that the conscious self might be able to find, and just go ahead and send it to me. Like put it in an envelope, put it in a box, send it off to me. And then when you find yourself sending it back to them is when they have the access to it. And for some people, it's like, it literally is like they just opened a letter and or opened a box and wow, they see this information that they did not know had been theirs to begin with. So you can find that there's a lot of different ways that people can send things away. So somebody might just be able to be like, toss it in a ball and throw it to you. You want, as the hypnotist, to be able to return that information to the subject in case they need it. And if they don't need it, well, they'll forget about it on their own anyway. But if they did need it because it was a thing that you had done that you want to be able to remember, it was a thing that you were working on to create amnesia and to have them be able to hold on to and remember it, you want to give it back to them. In fact, most of the time, I like to make sure that a person has information back to them, whether or not they knew that they were going to be able to have that or not. I like doing memory play, and I very rarely make it so that somebody can't remember a thing on any sort of permanent level. I have done that before with explicit consent on things that don't really matter, and I'm otherwise not really going to do that. So you can send it away in whichever form works best for you. For example, if you were have them throw it in a river, and the river just carries that off. The river could carry it off to you. You're like, oh, I found this thing floating down the river. I'm going to give it back to you now. And their brain can go, oh, look at that. I have it again. So one other way that I love to use is to interrupt somebody and then resume. And then in the middle, there's a space. So for example, if I want to really give somebody a really strong suggestion, and there I'll have them talk about something. So it doesn't really matter what it is that they're talking about. They can talk about something that they're passionate about, something that they really care about, something that's very interesting to them. And in the middle of them talking about that, put them into a trance, stop them in place. Doesn't matter how you do it. As long as they're responsive to that, and you say to them something along the lines of, you're going to hold on to the next thought that you had. In fact, that next thought that you had is going to be the only thing that you can find yourself thinking about. And when I say whatever it is you want to say, you find yourself able to move again. You find yourself speaking again as though no time had passed in between when you stopped speaking and when you started speaking again. And then you give the suggestion for whatever it is you'd like to give the suggestion for. So they resume. You've interrupted them. You give your little speech. You give your suggestion. Then you let them resume. And then whatever you've given them in that middle period becomes a thing that they find themselves letting go of because they've been holding on to another piece of information, and their brain is going to want to just slide over it. It's kind of like when we blink a little bit, right? Like we know there's stuff going on about us, but when we blink, the image isn't there anymore. We don't see that blank space. So it's kind of like you're taking advantage of their brain's little blank space while they're thinking about something else. It's like they have a continuous line of thought, and you're taking advantage of the little oxbow, a little pocket in time, to give them a new suggestion that then they, on a conscious level, have no awareness of. I really love using that one. I think it's a very powerful way to induce amnesia, and I think it works pretty well most of the time. So, the next technique I want to talk about, I call boxes and hidden rooms. Now, I talked about boxes just a little bit ago, but the way it normally works is that you find yourself taking information, putting it in a box, taping it up, and becoming unaware of the box itself. Now, maybe it's because the box blends into the room so very well. Maybe you have a Raiders of the Ark situation and you simply cannot tell which box a thing might be in, and you don't have the time or the capacity to go through all those boxes. Alternately, sometimes I have somebody put something in a box, and then the room itself that it's in becomes hidden. So that the room itself becomes hidden in a way so much so that only you, the hypnotist, and the subject's unconscious are the only two that can access that. So the conscious self has no awareness of it, and that can be quite fun too, because your unconscious can always remember a thing, and your conscious self isn't even aware that there's a thing that they could be aware of. And I think that that is one of the things that helps make amnesia really successful. When your conscious self isn't even quite aware that there's information that you're aware of. So if you don't know that you don't know something, it's much more powerful a way to have you not ever think about it than if you know there's something there and can't quite get it, because that is a technique that's valid as well. But sometimes at some point your brain shakes something loose and then you just say whatever the thing is. But most of the time, simply having information that's accessible only to your unconscious and the hypnotist makes it work really, really well. One of my favorite things that I like to do, and I think I have some examples right here, I use these things I call knockout powders. And I have a big handful, oops, one's on the floor. I have a big handful of these knockout powders right here. You see them? And I usually open up, I show somebody the color. Oh, this is the exact right one I think I wanted. It looks a little blue on the screen, but it's actually like a dark, shiny black. And I have, other colors like a red or a green or a silver. That's one of my favorites. So the these knockout powders act just like, oh, my floor is really going to be messy today. These knockout powders act like a drug. They're made of food safe mica. You blow them into somebody's face. Got to be careful with the colors because some of them can stain. They can get a little messy. I will say that sometimes I've had just as much luck taking one of these and blowing it at somebody. Sometimes the subject is so good they can actually see all the little particles in the air coming at them. Um, however they find themselves doing it, it doesn't really matter because the idea is that they have then inhaled this gas, this cloud of poison, this cloud of drug, whatever it happens to be, and they are affected. It's gotten deeply and powerfully and easily into their system and they're affected. So this one is one of my favorite ones. It is a blend of three others that I use. But scopolamine is what I call this one. So scopolamine is an actual drug that is used today for things like twilight birth. So you forget the birth of your child. I'm not sure why you want to do that. They use that in small doses, I think in patches for motion sickness disorders and for other things. You have to make sure that you get the dose right, however, because now it is mainly manufactured in Ecuador. And right next door, Colombia has co opted scopolamine. They put it on things like a business card and they will hand them out to people or they'll put it in your drink. And if you do not have the weight uh, of the drug correct for the weight of the person's body, you can find yourself dead or, having done terrible things. And those terrible things might involve something like um, cleaning out your whole apartment and helping the people that you're cleaning out your whole apartment for so that they can take all of your stuff away. So, scopolamine, the drug, induces amnesia and makes you very compliant. And as a hypnotist, I have to say that the idea of the drug is really quite fun, or the idea of those results of the drug is really quite fun. However, the death's not so pleasant. And also the whole, doing things without consent, also not good. So my version of scopolamine involves 15 minutes of amnesia and compliance, which can be very helpful for somebody who wants to get something into their system, a new habit, a new way of thinking about something, to get rid of something, and then to have them start acting upon that, acting in a new way when those 15 minutes is over without any awareness of what's happened. So that's the thing I use. It's just a trope to use this particular suggestion, and I find that it's pretty powerful. I've given some people scopolamine buttons so that they can just push their hand and they can experience the effects, so that the push on their hand is an anchor that was set up while the drug was being used, and otherwise they could push on their hand all day and it wouldn't matter. It has to be set up in a certain way. But so I blow scopolamine in somebody's face, they find themselves forgetting and being compliant for 15 minutes, which again works very well for me, just depending on the the type of suggestions that I want to give somebody. It can be really powerful to have them just begin to act in a different way when those 15 minutes are over, or even while the 15 minutes have started. There's no real reason why a person can't make a change really quickly with hypnosis. So I use that scopolamine as a way to make changes. I'm not using the real drug. I'm simply using mica as a substitute, as a suggestion for that drug. I talked a little bit earlier about doorways and about when people go from one room to another, how sometimes their brain completely forgets why they came into this room. If that's never happened to you, congratulations. If it has, you probably know what I mean. There is something about doorways that we don't quite understand. Maybe it's the fact that there's a transition going on in our brain, but whatever it happens to be, sometimes when we go through doorways, our brain just completely forgets a thing. So if you have somebody accept a suggestion and then go through a doorway or another doorway or 20 more doorways, at some point in time, and it depends on what other suggestions you might possibly give them, when they move from one to the other, their brain often forgets what it is that they were going to do. Now, that's a mostly conscious thing because your unconscious self can still remember to do the thing that you needed to do while your conscious self is unaware of it. And I'm a huge fan of your unconscious self doing things that your conscious self is unaware of. I think it's a really fun thing to make happen because the person is still doing it. It's still them doing it, even if on a conscious level they were not aware of what they were making happen. And that always delights me. I don't even know why, but it always, always delights me. So to have somebody forget something, have them go through a doorway, have them make a couple twists and turns and go through a doorway again, tell them something else. You could give them another suggestion that they're going to not forget. You can always add on more and more of these suggestions together, which is also another thing that I'm going to get to a little bit later because I think it's really interesting the way. So sometimes people think that forgetting things is simply a habit of old age. And the more you find yourself forgetting stuff or, dementia, some kind of senility, but our brains, if you find yourself forgetting things, your unconscious mind can actually be trained as well to hold on to and to remember things. I use an indexing feature where I allow your brain to create an index in a certain special way, and then you can you have recall of the things that you had indexed, and you can have really quick recall of those things as well, so that when you find yourself recalling those things, your brain understands. Your brain understands what you're supposed to remember and what you don't have to remember. All right. So, one of the other more common things that I think you might find yourself hearing if you are doing some amnesia play with somebody is you might hear something along the lines of the more you try to recall it, the faster it fades away, the quicker it disappears, the more it's like clouds in the sky on a nice windy day. They just go and go and go, and you can never chase that same cloud back. So that's a really common, really popular one. Another one might be it feels like it's on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't get it out. I will caution that if somebody can't say something, it doesn't mean that they can't write it down. It doesn't mean that they can't pantomime it out like they were playing charades. So make sure if you really don't want them to be able to do a thing, that you use as many different senses as a person might engage to recall a thing as possible. Like, what if somebody could draw some kind of artwork about it, or they could write the word down, or whatever, they could sing it. Make sure that you are covering the bases you need to cover because hypnotic subjects have tricky and fantastic minds, and their unconscious self will often do whatever it can to remember a thing, to hold on to a thing, to share with you that they did a good job at remembering a thing, even if you're trying to get them to forget it. So make sure that you're setting them and yourself up for success by covering as many bases as you possibly can so that when you have them try to recall a thing, by the way, try always means fail in this hypnotic context. So if you tell somebody to try and do something, they're not doing it. If you tell them to do something, they'll do it. If you tell something to try to do something, they won't do it. So if you tell somebody to try to do a thing, you want them to actually be able to fail at doing the thing. Because that's one way that hypnotists help people understand that they have the capacity to accept a suggestion and to make it work for their own benefit. So there's that. Sometimes I like to install a forget switch. Sometimes I will go into the control room of somebody's mind and I'll install a forget switch or I'll have them install a forget switch. It doesn't have to look like a usual switch. It could look like almost anything. So something that's going to help the person forget best. You can engage with them for ideas that are going to allow their brain to forget something best. What's going to help you forget best? You know, is there a color? Is there a shape? Is there an object that you find yourself just simply not paying any attention to? We'll make that the forget switch when you turn the forget switch on. Whatever's been said, whatever suggestions you've been given until it is off again, you have no memory of. So for some people, that works really, really well. Sometimes I have played around with Teflon coating somebody's mind so that it's so slippery and so smooth and nothing sticks to it at all. So every time you look at it, it's just super clean. And I guess, if you had to, you could just take a paper towel and wipe it all out and throw it away anyway. So hold on to that thought. The other thing you can find yourself doing, there's many other things, but this is another thing you can find yourself doing, is you can engage somebody's unconscious self in order to make sure the conscious self doesn't remember a thing, forgets it completely, etc. Now, I think of the unconscious and the conscious as separate parts of the person. That is not to say that those are the only parts of a person. You may have experienced something like this when you say a part of you wants to do this, but another part of you wants to do that. Or even if you don't use the word part, it's like, I want to do this and I also want to do that. So I think of those as parts of a person, and I also think of the unconscious and the conscious as parts of a whole. So any one of these things could refer to a person, but they have slightly different capacities and awarenesses. Like I said, your conscious self can only hold on to so many pieces of information at a time. So your unconscious self then can do different things. So when you ask your unconscious mind for help in ensuring that your conscious self does something, your conscious self can forget all sorts of things or can do all sorts of things, whether or not they're aware of it. And I like to ask the unconscious to do a thing. And then I like to do it in a couple stages. I like to say, hey, can you do this thing? Will you do this thing? And you need a yes to both of those answers. And sometimes people, when they go into trance or when they're putting somebody into trance, they think that a person in trance is this little zombie lump who's, not capable of opening their eyes or talking or moving. And sometimes people think that they're only like zombies who are capable of moving and doing stuff, but not necessarily being any kind of aware about it. And sometimes when you engage the unconscious mind, if you ask them to do a thing, a person will look like they're totally conscious, not like a zombie, but like they're totally conscious. They could have conversations, they could do all sorts of things in that unconscious state. And if you ask the unconscious to do something, I like, and I almost always do, I ask the unconscious to do something if it can, if it will. Sometimes it takes an unconscious a little bit to realize that it can do a thing, but I remind the unconscious mind of how much it's capable of doing and how much it already does on a normal basis, and that this should be pretty easy for it to connect the dots and figure out how to make it happen. I feel like this works extremely well with people who consider themselves analytical because they're used to following through complex situations and figuring out an answer. So their brain can usually make that sort of thing work very nicely. So you engage the unconscious, and then when it tells you it will do a thing, not just that it can, but also that it will, you thank it. I can't even tell you how many people who have commented that when I thank their unconscious mind, it felt more valued. And maybe that wasn't quite their particular phrase, but their unconscious usually really appreciates it when you're thanking them for doing a thing, whether or not they can do it and whether or not they will do it. They still usually appreciate being thanked for their participation in this activity, however that happens. I often like to refer to the unconscious as my co-conspirator. I feel like it responds well to that too. So you ask the unconscious if it will help you make something happen, if it will do the thing. And even if that thing is making your conscious self be totally unaware that something happened, that's still a really great way to engage the unconscious mind. So let's see. I'm going to talk about one more technique, maybe two, but one more technique. And you may have heard about this one before. I call it shattered. And I came up with this idea after reading this article about advertising. This advertising company had come up with this um, TV ad for selling detergent, and the the ads on the screen, they show this picture, the final few seconds of the ad. They show this picture of the detergent bottle. They blew it up really big and then they exploded it. And afterwards, the participants in the study, in the survey about this particular detergent, couldn't remember the name of it because the act of watching the thing get exploded on the screen kind of destroyed the images and the ideas that they may have gained by watching that advertisement to begin with. So you can do that with any sort of memory that a person has. You can have them recall the memory, make it big and bright and bold and massive, and then shatter it into 1,000 pieces. Like it was just a reflection in a mirror and it got broken, but it just really exploded really big. If you want to, because as I've discovered over time, that's not always the best for completely letting a thing go, but it's pretty powerful. You can then come through with a vacuum and pick up all the pieces and then get rid of them too. So sometimes you need to add an additional step. Sometimes you might discover that you need to add in piece after piece. You can add a whole bunch of different kinds of suggestions and put them all together. Um, and when you find yourself putting a whole bunch of different suggestions together, your brain, if you're on the receiving end of that, your brain can just feel not only the overload, but also can really get the idea that this is the thing that you were supposed to forget, and it often will. So that is a quick overview, or a slightly quick overview, of hypnotic amnesia and the ways that you can find yourself inducing it and or experiencing it. I hope that's been useful for you. And I hope that your unconscious mind enjoys every little bit of that. So thanks for being here. And I'll be back with another class sometime. Thanks.